Madhukar.
Hello, good evening. Good evening to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, because people are here from the different time zones. I will quickly finish my introduction part. Today we have Pradak Pandey with us, and he's currently working as a postdoc researcher at Askil University, and he has finished his PhD from Homi Bhabha Center for Science and Education, TIFR. He's currently working on embedded narratives of critical thinking and virtual learning technologies in science and education. He has also worked in the area of conceptualizing, developing, and testing an active and embodied new media interface to enhance science and mathematics learning. Apart from this, he is a founding member of Learning Science Research Group and member of Virtual Learning Lab. He has been also awarded by European Association for Research on Learning and Instruction Travel Scholarship, and also Klaus Zakov Foundation Travel Support. We welcome you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Kavita and Madhukar. I'll just share my screen and then we can. Okay, can you confirm that you're seeing my screen right now?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay.
Madhukar, आप video off कर दो.
Yep, yes, sir.
Great, thanks. Maybe I could. Anyway, I'll just leave it to that. So before we start, I mean, of course, we don't have enough time to get to know each other, and it would have been really nice to know where different people are from who are attending to this session. But I just assume that you're all teachers in schools, and some of you are educational or cognitive science researchers, or even in the learning sciences, maybe. And with that assumption, I'll go ahead with this talk. So before we begin, I wanted you to do a small activity. So I would have liked to do this as a pair and share activity, or maybe in groups, but we'll not spend too much time on technical aspects of this thing in Zoom. But as an individual, then I want you to think about a concept or a topic in your subject or your area of teaching that you find very difficult to teach. And just a second. Yeah, I want you to think of a concept that you find very difficult to teach, and I want you to make note of it. And as you get ready, you might as well want to share a few people or maybe a couple of people. You can just unmute and talk and tell everyone what concept you think is very difficult for you to teach in your classrooms. Anyone to volunteer?
Negative numbers.
Negative
Louder,
numbers.
please.
Excellent.
Yeah, negative numbers is always a pain.
Interesting. Anything else from anyone else?
Imaginary, when you come to teaching complex numbers, the I or a J becomes extremely difficult to convey to children. So you're going from a concrete to something which is imaginary.
Excellent example. Anything from science or language, if there are any language teachers or any other discipline?
Somebody has put Lorentz force.
Okay, I have no idea what that is. But I assume it's a complex concept. Okay, so I think we can go ahead now, because even though you might not have shared, you know what concepts you find difficult in your teaching. I find some concepts very difficult to teach when I'm interacting with small children in science. One of them, for instance, is of course numbers. The other is area, which was one of the the concept of area and length measurement, which was one of the topics that I researched in my pre-doctoral work with Jai Shri Ramdas, whom you've already heard. So let's go to the topic now. And the topic that I'll be talking about today is reimagining imagination, focusing on how students learn science and mathematics. And to learn, I'm sort of equating it with imagination or imagining, being able to imagine here. Again, now, before we proceed to the next thing, I want you to now think about why the concept that you thought is difficult to teach is difficult. Why is it difficult to teach that concept that you thought? For instance, negative numbers. Why is it difficult to teach? Anyone?
I think the challenge with that is normally numbers are associated with counting items, right? And the concept of it being negative is something difficult for a 6th, 7th class kid to learn.
That's right. So there's nothing natural that they can relate to with negative numbers. Yeah.
Correct.
Anything else? Any other concept and difficulty in teaching that one?
I found ratios very difficult to convey, even though there are so many examples of ratios. But I've taught, I've just interacted with very few children, but it's very difficult to teach them ratios. And then, of course, the decimal point after that, you put them as fractions and then ratios, and then you get to decimal points. But even fractions and ratios are difficult.
Right. Excellent. Which sort of relates to the fact that it is difficult to see ratios in natural things, but it's not as difficult as seeing negative numbers, for instance, because there are ratios and proportions available for perception. For instance, you can see ratios and proportions in your real life. But that sort of takes us to the point that I wanted to come to by asking you this question and getting some answers from you. And it's a sort of philosophical point or assumption that when you think about science and mathematics as disciplines, they deal with entities and phenomena which are mostly beyond everyday perception or interaction. You can't interact with many of the concepts and the entities and phenomena and the processes that those concepts are related to that are studied in science in your everyday life. And there are many examples. So, for instance, either those concepts or the phenomena or entities that those concepts are related to are very huge in size compared to humans, or they are too tiny to see, or they happen over long time scales, and humans don't even live that long to witness them happening, like evolution, for instance, or they are very quick, like chemical reactions, and it's very difficult to see sometimes what reactions are happening, also because they're happening at a different scale in space. Then there are complex feedback loops involved in many of the concepts. So, for instance, if you look at ecosystem and the cycles, ecological cycles, they have different feedback loops that are difficult to perceive in the first place, but also difficult to imagine because they are not accessible directly. Then there are abstract concepts that you gave examples of, like ratios and numbers, and also different laws of, for instance, thermodynamics and physics that involve very abstract meaning of entities and phenomena. And then finally, all these entities and phenomena that we study or try to imagine, they involve some opaque or indirect instruments, like, for instance, numbers or algorithms and operations that are difficult to access. So what this tells us about learning science and mathematics and allied disciplines is that access to these entities and phenomena and their concepts is possible only via imagination. I mean, you need to be able to imagine these entities and phenomena in order to access them. And that imagination depends on what we call as external representations or models. For instance, equations or diagrams or graphs or animations or different models, or even language, because these are the things that give us access to those phenomena and entities. I mean, if I don't have a picture here of a galaxy, and if you've never even seen or heard anything about galaxy, with the word galaxy, it's very difficult to imagine what that is. So the word galaxy itself gives you access to the thing that is galaxy, or even the DNA word gives you access to what that thing actually is. So this DNA and galaxy, they are what we call external representations. And if you grant that, then you understand that expertise, and it follows that expertise with these external representations, such as equations and diagrams and language, in science and mathematics and in other disciplines as well, is very critical to conceptual learning, or learning about anything in those disciplines for that matter. Now, this expertise in learning sciences research is called as ER integration, and I'll come to why and what that means. So now again we come to another thing, and I would want some other or more or diverse examples from you in order to be better able to relate this talk to your discipline. So I want you now to think of what technology or tools do you use to tackle the teaching learning problems around the concept that you just shared with everyone. So you know that there are some concepts that are difficult to teach, and you also know why. What do you do about them? How do you really go around teaching? Any examples?
Like for example, for negative numbers, when we teach integers for positive, when we introduce, we use green tokens for positive numbers and red tokens for negative numbers.
Right.
And pair them to get the result. When they pair, it makes 0. So that sort of helps, that concrete aids help at the initial stages.
Excellent. Yeah. So the other example I would give in case of negative numbers would be, for instance, elevator that goes underground. And so there would be -1, -2, and -3 floors, just like there would be +1, +2, +3 floors when the elevator goes up. Excellent. Next example, if anyone wants to share.
Project, I use some videos actually, how it works, like motors, Lorentz force, what I said Lorentz force. It is actually in that electromagnetism.
Okay.
So it is really abstract to understand how it works, the direction of magnetic field or the electric current. So there are some good videos which I use. And motor, actually, we can simple that a concrete example I show them how it works, how the direction changes, and all.
Right. Very nice. So, yeah, sorry, that was supposed to come later. So we do have tools and technology tools, and that technology doesn't have to be new media. It could be traditional. So, for instance, the example of coins you shared earlier, I guess Anuradha, shows that, I mean, it involves an old technology or material, which is coins itself. It doesn't have to be, everything doesn't have to be computer based, but there are also a lot of possibilities offered by technology that is computer based or new media based. So, for instance, videos, they can be more interactive and more engaging than some other technologies such as text. But they may not be as interactive as coins can be, because you then are involved in doing something with the coins. Nevertheless, every technological tool has its own advantage and disadvantage when tackling problems around learning. So if now we sort of go back again to the conceptual part of ER integration, or learning with external representations. And now if you look at, and we'll come to the technology problem again back later. So now if you look at this problem of understanding a certain concept through external representations, if you look at the literature that researches this problem, they sort of overall give this kind of picture of the learning difficulty with external representations. They say that there are different types or levels of external representations. For instance, there is a macro level, which is more accessible to human senses. So for instance, if you're talking about a chemical reaction, then the color change that you would see, for instance, in a video would be a macro level representation of the chemical reaction. Then there is a micro level. In case of chemistry, it's again very clear. If you're talking about a chemical reaction, then the molecular models that explain that chemical reaction would be a micro level representation of that reaction. And then there would be a symbolic representation that talks about the chemical reaction in terms of symbols. And this is again flexible. I mean, there could be different types of levels. If you look at the literature, there's a myriad of different models like these that are proposed to explain what are the different types of representations, depending on different series. But generally, people agree that there are different levels of representations and there are different kinds of representations, and that learning in science and mathematics and in allied disciplines requires a student to simultaneously view or see or imagine these different representations at the same time and extract information from them about the concept that they are representing. Then interlink this information and hold it in working memory and interpret or reason about the concept based on that information that is extracted. Now, the models that subscribe to this view of learning difficulty also say that all these processes, if you ask a student to do, I mean, you don't have to ask really, students do it according to these models. All these processes being done simultaneously create high cognitive load on students' mind. And because the student is a novice and lacks conceptual knowledge in the field, lacks exposure to context, so for instance, in the case of negative numbers, because they already don't have an idea of how negative numbers are related to natural entities and phenomena, the cognitive load increases further, and the student then finds it very difficult to engage with that concept. But this whole picture, this way of approaching the problem of learning difficulties related to ER external representations is based on something called as classical cognition model or classical information processing model. And I'll explain that just in a bit. So if you now go, this was a learning difficulty model, but now if you go at cognition level, the way these difficulties are explained is like this, through the information processing model. This model says that there is this mind, and then there are these external representations like equations and diagrams and so on. And the mind extracts information from these external representations through senses. So when you see something, you extract information through it, and then you process it inside the mind in terms of internal representations, what we also call as mental models or mental representations. And then once extraction has been done, and the mind translates this information and translates between the different kinds of information, and then tries to make sense of it. Now, the problem is that the mind has limited resources and capacities. So if you look at memory, for instance, particularly working memory, there is research that demonstrates that human working memory is limited. There are only limited amount of information you can process at a single time. Then, of course, there is limited imagery, which is the ability to visualize something internally. And this is facilitated by chunking, or there are some top-down influences that the mind recruits while extracting information in order to help extract more information and process it more effectively. But if you look at this whole model, the external representations are treated as vehicles of information, as if they carry some information and the mind extracts them or takes that information from the external representations, and the external representations are then no longer important or relevant. And all the processing according to this model of mind is fully internal. So once you extract information, everything is irrelevant, and what happens inside is what matters, and that everything happens inside. And then you give an output in terms of an action. And the constraint of limited capacities in the mind collectively leads to cognitive load, which is what you heard about earlier. So cognitive load is the load that is created on your mind because there is too much information to process. But this is an old model, and my own research and a lot of other research in the learning sciences and in cognition and in education now talks about a new model that discards this old model, saying that the mind doesn't work this way, and this is a very wrong interpretation of the comparison between human mind and computers. So human minds are nothing like computers. So what this model says is that the mind is a porous thing, not literally, because then life wouldn't be possible. But it's a porous thing in conceptually. That means that there are things that can flow in and out, and then there are these external representations like equations and diagrams. And what mind does is actually couples with them in terms of again conceptually. Via interaction. So when we actually perceive something, see something, or we experience something physically by handling it or manipulating it, and the way our body relates to these external representations and diagrams via senses, the mind couples with them. So there is a two-way interaction between external representations and their affordances and the body or the action system, which makes the whole mind more extended. And what this model says that then the external representations are not something that is irrelevant after you have information, but that they are also part of the mind because you're interacting with them. And in this way, then the process that the mind does is extended to the environment. In the earlier model, the mind is a constrained processor, whereas in the later, the newer model, the mind is an extended system of sensing and action. In the earlier model, the outdated model, the mind is separate from body. But in the newer model, the mind and body are coupled. In fact, they are the same. And that sort of resolves this philosophical question of mind-body dualism, where the mind and body are really different. Now, why is this relevant? So I'll give you an example, and I'll ask you to solve this. And I don't want you to really solve this, but imagine or solve this mentally without using anything around you. So the thing that I want to come to is that if I ask you to solve this, people like me would solve it like this in their mind without using anything, any support in mentally. And so what essentially I'm demonstrating is that I will write something in my mind, or I will imagine solving this problem similar to what's shown on the bottom right corner, based on my experiences of writing and solving this problem through written process. So what does it say about the new model? It says that the mind is coupled system is what that the model asserts. So when you actually imagine mentally solving a mathematical or an arithmetic problem like this, you see something like this because you have been doing that using paper and pencil for too long. So all your experiences of doing something with these abstract things or representations like the numbers and the different operations that you do on those numbers is based on your experiences of writing them and then solving that arithmetic problem. So it is a kind of bodily interaction, and I'm calling it as doing. So doing using paper and pencil, the mind stores it as internal representations, which are essentially patterns of patterns of your sensory motor interaction or your bodily interaction with those external representation system. And when you imagine them, they are redone in the mind. So when you imagine, you're actually doing paper pencil based arithmetic but it's just that you're not actually doing and using your hand. It's being done covertly. Now, interesting thing is that if you have somebody who's expert in another method of solving arithmetic problem and not paper and pencil, and all of you probably know this, abacus, which is a very different way of doing arithmetic. If you have somebody who's an expert in that, then the way the body interacts with that representational system is completely different. And then you would have somebody, if you ask that person to solve this arithmetic problem mentally, then they would do it something like this. And there's a stark difference in these two between these two different the way these two different methods or representational systems help us imagine a particular problem. And the point then is that, and I'm not going to go into the neurological details about this, but the point here is that then what you do actually is what you become. In simpler words, if you interact with paper and pencil, then if you imagine or if you want to learn something related to the concept that is related to what you've done using paper and pencil, then all your resources related to your doing in the past with paper and pencil will be activated or will be used in order to help you learn something new related to the same doing. I'm sorry about the convoluted language, but that's how it is. So the lesson that we learn from this is that doing in general is critical to learning. And I would then suggest very concretely, it's a far-fetched conclusion, but to be able to apply it in your teaching, it's important for you to know that there are certain cognitive models that suggest you to have your students do something and not just watch something or read something. I mean, reading and watching is also doing, but it is a different kind of doing. It's not doing with your hands and your body. So the more experiential or more bodily involvement you have your students while experiencing or the more your students involve their bodies in interacting with a certain concept or external representations, the better it is. And this may not be better in terms of helping them answer a certain question in an exam, but when it comes to conceptual understanding, it definitely is going to be superior to just memorizing or interacting with the text. So yeah, I mean, there are trade-offs, but it is definitely important that your students actually experience things and do things for lifelong learning and not just for solving a particular exam that nobody will remember probably 10 years down the line. Okay, so that's a big lesson and has a big cognitive science and neuroscience background to it as well, and probably also philosophical. So I guess I have, do I have 10 more minutes?
You have half an hour more.
I have, okay, great, because I have a lot of slides as well. And I wasn't planning on using them, but if I have time, I would then delve into it. So now I'm sort of gonna get into
that. Sorry, there's a question that I think is relevant to what you just mentioned. The question is, does abacus give better body doing experience than pen and paper?
I wouldn't say better, but it's different, and it's I think both experiences are very important. So when I gave you the example, I didn't mean to say that, and I'm sorry if I indicated that abacus is not superior to pen and pencil. Like I said before, every technology has its advantages and disadvantages, and every technological system, including paper and pencil, has their own affordances or action possibilities, and they are all important. What I meant to say was that it is important to give diverse and richer experiences to your students. So if your students are already doing something with paper and pencil, maybe it will help if you give them abacus experience as well. but not one of them. And if you have any other more diverse system as compared to abacus and paper and pencil, then maybe you introduce that as well, because all these different experiences will help your students approach the problem of arithmetic differently, and that would help them gain a different or a newer perspective towards that problem when it comes to lifelong learning. So none of the
then one follow-up question from me. Wouldn't that,
yes.
if suppose a child is made to do both, Bacchus way of learning and the usual pen and paper, right? So you have the the visuomotor, the motor cortex, and of course you have the again the visual, but still the cognitive part of it. So, and then there's a language, because all of this is language in some sense. Wouldn't that confuse the child, because now they're trying to do in both? If I give a problem statement.
I think that's a very good question, and I don't have a straight answer to it, but my immediate answer would be maybe it will confuse them for that moment. But in the long run, they will have more experiences than any other person doing just pencil and paper, or just one of them, the methods. And again, it's difficult to say 10 years down the line how those experiences that person has had with those three different representational systems will contribute to their approach to life, or I don't know, solving a particular mathematical problem later on. But because cognition is not only momentary, it's also temporal, and like recent theories argue that your experiences 10 years ago have causal relationship to what you're doing right now. But that causal relationship is very far-fetched because so much time has passed. So there's no way to map, to establish one-to-one mapping between what you're doing right now with what you did, say, 10 days or 10 years ago. But there is definitely some contribution, which is difficult to completely see at that moment or study. So maybe it's not an empirical question to study at all. We just have to assume that diverse or richer experiences are better because that's what theory says so.
Yeah, thank you. I think there are more questions, but I'll move it to the end. Okay, there are very good questions. We'll move it to the end.
Great, thanks. So now I was planning to delve a bit into my own research that is about doing and learning. And it's again, a different kind of doing. It's a doing with technology, and that technology is new media-based technology. So currently I'm working with virtual reality of this kind, the third kind, not the first and the second one. But just so that you know, virtual reality is a broad term, and it involves many different things. There are three basic types that literature talks about. The first one that you see, where a person is sitting in front of a computer with a video game like a controller, like an Xbox controller, is also virtual reality, but it's a non-immersive virtual reality. People there are not as immersed in the system as they are in the later two systems. The latter two systems. On the right side, you see what is called as cave. It is also a kind of virtual reality system where there is a set of projections on different walls or different surfaces in a room, where a person goes in and then sees those projections and feels immersed in the environment that are being projected. And in the third one, which is what I do research on, involves wearing a head-mounted device or a headset that cuts you off from everything that's happening outside the headset. And the headset essentially has a screen that gives you a 360 interactive perceptual input, and you have controllers of different kinds in order to interact with those perceptible elements. And those controllers can be seen, for instance, in the picture where a woman is standing and operating something with her hands. I'll just give you a quick demo of something that happened at my university way before I joined, of course, which involves some doing. I'll go to 129 so that, and it's in Danish, so I'll just stop the audio. But you can see that there is a model of atoms, and in this simulation, it's particularly argon atoms. And this person is interacting with those atoms. This simulation basically simulates the different states of argon based on temperature. So you can actually play around with those atoms. You can touch them. Of course, you don't have a haptic feedback, but you can touch them, and then you can drag them and make them move away from each other, simulating a different state of the argon gas. All right. Now, I think this is the final activity so far, but I want you to now think about the technology tools that you mentioned or might not have mentioned, but you use in your teaching. I want you to think about your experiences about their effectiveness. So do you think they were effective in teaching the concept that you intended to teach using them? And whether or not they were effective, did you encounter any challenges or difficulties while planning to implement these technological solutions? Any experiences? Any one of you can unmute and share your experience. How difficult was it to implement that technology, and was it really effective?
Hello.
Yes.
What I faced, it is effective, not for all the kids. Some of them, it's very quite effective. They understand also it is very easy. That is one. Some of them, they may, even after that, they are not understanding those abstract ideas. And another part is time challenge is there. Sometimes I get time. These two I faced many. Thank
Excellent. What technology was this? Just for
videos also.
Yeah. Excellent. Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, I was looking at this virtual labs. We have all these experiments set up, simple science experiments, pendulum experiments, force, mass. You see it, you don't feel it. It's not the same as swinging a pendulum yourself as against seeing something swinging on the display, right? So when you get a child back to real lab and ask them, there seem to be the strength, the tactile, the force that you need to actually let go. Those things are missing. The technology doesn't help when it comes to experiments. And there's just one question, or one of your the reply to your question. Just an experience taking class from laptop is not good as learning in class. Why is that?
Absolutely. It's again a difficult question to answer, but there are many factors. So one is, for instance, that when you're taking class via laptop or online, then you're looking at laptop and not people. And even if you're looking at people, you're looking at their videos and not really the real experience that you have, which is more bodily. Again, the virtual experience that you have is not very bodily. And you're not used to that evolutionarily or even during your lifetimes. You're more used to experiencing interaction with other people in physical space and not really in virtual space. So the whole idea of how body language, for instance, or eye movements or gaze affects you and your interaction with those people is very implicit and very, I don't know whether I should call it unconscious, but it's not available for thought immediately. If you think, maybe. But when you interact with people physically in physical space, in actual space, then there are many things in our behavior that happen that otherwise won't happen. And I don't want to list them down because it's, again, a difficult question to answer. That won't happen if you're doing this in virtual. I think that's sort of one of the main things I feel about online teaching and why it's not so interesting. But there are many other things that you can do in physical interaction, that you can actually collaborate, you can work with others, and you can observe their actions and modulate your own actions based on observation of those actions. And again, a lot of it happens unconsciously, but also consciously. So there are all kinds of aspects when it comes to these two scenarios. Okay. I hope that sort of, that's an immediate answer, but I hope that sort of covers some of the aspects that you might have expected in the answer. But yeah, I agree with the challenges and difficulties that some of you mentioned in terms of implementing technological solutions. Time is one, of course. The other problem that I face is scale. It's very difficult to scale some technological solutions, especially some of those like virtual reality that I am involved with right now. So right now, okay, so now what I would do is I would take you through a few research studies very quickly and then go on to a new project that I've been doing. So the research studies that I will mention are mostly media comparison research that look at how virtual reality compares to other technology in terms of learning, teaching, concepts in science. And there was this one study that we did last year was on lab safety training. So it was to train students with safety measures in science labs. Sorry, what's that? I don't think I heard clearly.
No, that was somebody by mistake turned on their mic.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. So I use this simulation from a company called Labster. That's a Danish educational technology company based in Copenhagen, whom we had a contract with. And it's not a very interactive simulation, but it's very detailed in terms of its visual and perceptual quality. So this simulation involves the student going to the lab and then checking different materials and finding mistakes in the way they are kept, like explosives and flammables. There is also an instance where the student goes to a desk and then does an experimental procedure and spills a liquid accidentally that's corrosive and also flammable, and then suddenly faints. So of course the student experiencing them, this doesn't faint, but that is how that is what is shown in VR, and then the person has to take some action in order to correct everything that happened in the lab. So it is in a way very experiential, but not very interactive in terms of the physical movement that a student has to do. And I won't go into the research design details, but basically we had 3 different conditions. We compared VR with desktop and then text. And then there were different questionnaires and knowledge related questions and tests. And what we found that when it comes to topic knowledge, then text, presenting students with text actually performed was the best. Students learn really well when they were given a manual as opposed to interacting with a VR simulation or a desktop simulation. But when it came to their motivation and self-efficacy and also their enjoyment of the whole intervention, VR was the best. And that was, of course, not very surprising for many reasons. One reason being that when you give technology to someone, a new technology, they are more there's this thing called novelty effect. So they are overwhelmed with that experience, and then they feel highly motivated or very confident in doing something else. But part of it also is because when you have interactive possibilities or some possibility of experiencing something, then you are more realistic in terms of estimating your own motivation. So there is sort of a contradictory arguments indicating similar result. So that's a good finding, isn't it? That the text was not sorry, the VR and desktop were not as good as text, which tells us that VR improves overall engagement among students, but probably knowledge is not improved. Then we did another study where we wanted to see how VR compares with watching videos and how doing something afterwards, um, uh, uh, after watching a video or interacting with the VR simulation, helps learning. So what we did here was we gave one batch of students VR and the other watched a video of that simulation, and then they went to a table like as is shown in the top right corner, where the girl is actually enacting or doing the procedure that she saw in the VR after watching VR, after interacting with VR simulation, and the same was done after video for the video students. And we found that when we asked VR students to enact or do something, do the thing that they saw afterwards, then their knowledge and skills and enjoyment was higher. But in case of video, only topic knowledge was higher. And when VR students do not do that procedure later on, they did not gain as much knowledge or skill or knowledge of skills as they did when they actually did that procedure. And in terms of video, watching video and not doing that procedure afterwards did not differ the result. That was a very quick picture of the results. What it overall tells us is that people learn better with VR when they are allowed to reflect on the content. And I think that sort of applies to all technology, that when you give people some moments to pause and then have them reflect on what they're doing or what they are experiencing, it gives them a better or a richer understanding of what they've been doing and how that relates to probably the concept that aspect of experience is related to. Then we did a longitudinal study because, like I said before, when you give new technology to people, the experience of that technology itself is so overwhelming that they think that they have gained a lot of knowledge, which may not be really true. So we wanted to know what happens if you give multiple technology experiences to students. Because when you have multiple experiences, your novelty effect sort of reduces. You're not so new to that technology, and that technology is not so new to you anymore. So after a few attempts, you don't feel so new about, feel so overwhelmed about the whole technological experience, and maybe that has an effect on your learning. And again, I won't go into the details of the research design. So we expected that when students have multiple VR experiences, this whole overwhelming effect will reduce, and maybe their motivation and interest will decrease, but knowledge will increase. And let's see what happened. What happened was that it actually did happen. VR, after a certain time, gave better results in terms of knowledge gain. Intrinsic motivation or their confidence did not change through time, but enjoyment was very high among students who experienced VR, as opposed to students who experienced video many times of the same simulation. So what all these results sort of tell, especially the last one, is that there is this there's this question that we need to ask as teachers and educators, whether technology is really necessary to solve our teaching learning problem. Because without proper understanding of what actual value your technology is adding to learning, it may not be useful. I mean, what you see in the results earlier is that sometimes motivation goes high, sometimes it doesn't. But most of the time, knowledge gain doesn't really happen in the case of VR, for instance. So because these technological solutions are difficult to implement and they're expensive, it is important to ask, is it really worth investing in them, and not only in terms of money, but also in terms of time, in integrating them in our teaching. But this is not the only question we should ask. The other things that we should consider is that the current technological and digital teaching solutions, most of them focus on this overwhelming effect, or the wow effect, that students feel when they experience a technology, that technology is great. But it's great in just saying that it's great, and it's great in just experiencing it is great. But whether does it really have an actual effect on one's learning is the question that we need to ask. And part of the reason, part of the thing that we need also to consider is that most of the technological solutions that are scaled, they do not emphasize interaction. So for instance, the simulations that I just talked about, and the research that I talked about, involved simulations that were not very interactive, like I said before. They just involved a point and click interaction, which is very similar to operating your mouse and your desktop. So it was not very interactive, but if you look at that company, it's earning billions of dollars today through these simulations. So I mean, I don't want to go into the commercial and the political part of it, but if you look at the technological solutions available with the help of these companies, research and development, they are not very interactive, and that probably tells us that maybe they're not very effective as well in terms of long-term learning and teaching. And they're not interactive in the sense that they don't involve many bodily movements. But if you look at the theoretical model that we discussed earlier, it emphasizes that bodily movements are critical to learning, especially in the long term. So what this suggests is that apart from this question of whether a technological solution adds real value to our learning and teaching methods, it is also important to understand whether that technological solution involves interactive elements. Is it really based on some theory of learning, or is it just intuitively designed? So it is important to ask that design question as well, because when you ask this question of whether something is really worth integrating in your teaching, it is sort of guided by whether that technological solution is well designed or not. And which is why I'm doing this other research, which is design-based research, where we develop our own VR simulations for conceptual learning in science.
Rajat, you have around 5 minutes. There are some questions, so
I think I'll finish in 2 minutes.
Yeah,
I'm nearly done. So what we are doing right now is we are using the headset that allows more interaction possibilities that's shown on the top left corner. And for understanding cognitive and learning mechanisms, I'm using something called as eye tracking and interaction tracking in VR in order to really know how students are learning. Here is a quick snapshot from one of the earlier versions of the simulation that we are developing. So this simulation is about somebody learning about how biochemical reactions happen at molecular level. There is an enzyme and there is a substrate, which is bacterial cell wall, component of bacterial cell wall. And so the student, when goes into this VR simulation, embodies or becomes this enzyme. And then their hands, they become hands of an enzyme. And then by doing different actions, they actually interact with this substrate and then break it down to complete the biochemical reaction. So what you see here is a bacterium that is purple. And what you see towards you is a molecular arm, which is actually the arm of an enzyme, which is embodied by the user. And so by dragging, by bringing the bacterium closer through an action, the person goes to a deeper level, and then sees the chemical structure at a certain level, then pulls it towards the person, towards himself or herself, and goes to another level. That level looks like this, where there are different, there are frames of a molecular chain, and then the person attaches their arms to the molecular chain by doing a certain action, and by twisting it, then they break it down, completing the reaction. There are also different representations, like graph, for instance, in the background that shows how the reaction is happening, what is the energy level, and so on and so on. And while doing this, they also get haptic feedback. So when an electron, for instance, or an electron cloud, as a representative of the phenomenon, goes to the molecular chain from the enzyme arm, then they get a haptic feedback, and when it comes back, when the reaction completes, they get another haptic feedback suggesting that the reaction has happened. Sorry about have to go through this very quickly, but this is just a snapshot of what we're doing. Yeah, so it sort of revises the lesson 5 a bit more at a certain level by asking this question that we need to really focus on the design of the learning activity and whether it fully utilizes the potentials of technology, because non-interactive technology may be very expensive and difficult to implement, but may not really serve the purpose of learning or teaching. Yeah, I'll have to stop here now. But thank you so much.
Okay, there are a couple of questions. I'm going to start from some of them which were asked before. I think Professor Jayashree Ramdas' question was reflection part also added to your video condition. It was one of the experimental conditions. I'll just quickly list out the other questions. Are there issues of disorientation that participants have to overcome? How serious is this issue in your research studies? And that was from Professor Bapi. And another question from Professor Jayashree: shouldn't we look deeper into non and low-tech embodied methods like gestures and actions at all levels of education? You're on mute, Prasad.
Yeah, sorry about that. It always happens. Both are very interesting questions. So I'll probably go with Professor Papiraju's question first. Are there studies that show sensory-motor engagement with material enables superior performance outcomes? It's, again, a complex question because it depends on how you define superior performance outcome in the first place. But there are a lot of studies. So for instance, there's a very famous paper by Martin and Schwartz on physically distributed learning that shows how qualitatively it is different when you interact with blocks of material as opposed to doing something as more traditional. And how does it really change your understanding of, I guess it was fractions, but I don't really remember. But yes, there is a lot of work being done in cognition and instruction, and also in the learning sciences, that shows that there are differences, qualitative differences, when it comes to different kinds of sensory motor engagements. I'm not really sure if they indicate superior or inferior performance outcomes. It depends on how do you really assess these interventions. I mean, if you're looking at something like a text-based instrument to assess the effect of, for instance, physically handling something, then probably physical experiences may not be very effective, because then you have to transform your physical experiences into words, and you have to articulate the way you answer that question. But if you're using another physical experience or physical test as a performance test, then of course it would probably be it would probably turn out that your physical experience is more valuable when answering a test that is in similar medium. But I just remembered that there are also a lot of studies involving skill training in, for instance, VR, showing that when you actually have a very, very realistic interaction with things, for instance, in lab safety case, then you have a more richer understanding of that skill, and also your body moves well when tested out of that virtual reality. And there's so much work happening, for instance, in simulators, flight simulators, for instance, at big industries like Airbus and Boeing and so on. I hope I did answer some
The question
parts of the
from
question.
Professor
JR?
Jayashree, I think it is part of it, right? What you?
Yeah, but I also want to comment on her comment that even the paper and pencil can be used in diverse ways using different algorithms on paper sketching, mapping, making a concept map. Absolutely, I completely agree with that. But there would be still some limitations to the affordances offered by paper and pencil. So, for instance, the way you interact with numbers in in a simulation will not be similar to the way you interact with numbers on paper and pencil. So, for instance, somewhere in a simulation, using technology, you may be able to you act on numbers as if they are real entities or real physical objects, but the paper may not allow you to do that. So there are qualitative differences, but again, it's a different question of whether one of them is superior or inferior. But I completely agree with that comment.
Yeah, I think we are totally out of time. So, I mean, the questions are there. If you want to kind of answer them later, maybe send us a mail. We'll be able to send it out to the person who's asked. So, thanks a lot. Actually, you covered an important aspect, which was on the question that we always get: how much of technology can be introduced in the classroom, and at what age? Okay, the age part of it is something that we all need to kind of answer and question, and to for what topic, which are the topics that would actually benefit if introduce a technology, and which can't, which are not possible. These are questions that India as a country is now struggling to answer. The pandemic has just pushed every conversation much faster in this way. VR is being used in some schools, which are slightly high-end schools, but they're not using it in the right way. So that's, I think, something that we need to address. Thanks a lot. And to all the participants, Prasad has actually provided his email address. Do write to him if you have any specific questions about his research or how to actually introduce some of these concepts into your classrooms. Thanks a lot again. On behalf of all the participants, we thank you for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Shrikant, you can close this video and then start the next one.
Okay.